Happy Thanksgiving, everyone. Hope you're with your loved ones or least favorite brother-in-law, tossing the old pigskin in the yard and enjoying some crisp Miller lattes. We wanted to bring you one of our most listened to episodes of 2025. It's with Chirag Shah, the CFO of Motive. Fingers crossed they have a shot to go public in 2026. On this episode, we talk about his experiences scaling Cornerstone OnDemand, an ed tech company that he helped take from $30 million in revenue to nearly $1 billion, and how you know when it's right to take a company public. We also go over the process of taking a company private again, which he did in a $5.2 billion deal. This episode is filled with tactical insights on building sales capacity, timely for anyone finishing annual planning season over the turkey. From digging through your resume, it looks like you've scaled companies from around $30 million to around $1 billion in revenue, and at times tripled ARR.
I've seen over the years, like companies from a valuation perspective, it's not always that like the absolute best performing companies are the highest valued. I mean, obviously there's a very strong correlation to, having high growth rates and having, a good level of efficiency, and that often drives valuation. But if you're not going to be that sort of highest performing company in the public markets, that's okay, as long as you have a level of predictability where an investor can come to, their team and say, hey, like, I love this business, I love this stock, because I know that every quarter this management team is going to execute. They're going to put up numbers, and they're going to beat their guidance, and they're going to raise, right? And like, you can't say that about every company.
Is this thing on?
Yesterday's price is not today's price.
Welcome back to the Run the Numbers podcast, where we talk to the people turning chaos into cash flow and occasionally taking companies public, then private again. Woo, just for fun. Today's guest is Chirag Shah, CFO of Motive and former CFO of Kong, as well as Cornerstone OnDemand. And he's built a rare muscle set. He's scaled companies from under $30 million in ARR to nearly $1 billion, led through IPO prep and execution, and even helped take a company private again in a $5.2 billion deal. But here's the twist. He's also done time as a general manager, stepping outside the spreadsheet to run business units directly, the whole P&L. We'll talk about what that shift taught him, how he spots when it's time to hit the gas on growth, and why hypergrowth doesn't have to mean financial chaos. He'll unpack this concept of personal product market fit, the unspoken cues that a company is IPO ready, and how financial discipline holds up when headcount doubles every 6 months. And for those of you wrestling with the public versus private debate, Chirag's operated on both sides, and he's got a pragmatic advice for CFOs navigating that call. All this and much, much more after a short word from our sponsors. This episode of Run the Numbers is brought to you by Mercury, business banking for founders and finance pros who want their financial stack to actually work together. Now, I don't plug tools I don't know or intimately use. I've been a Mercury customer for a couple of years now. In fact, I showed the Mercury dashboard to their CFO, Daniel Kang, from their finance team right before we hit record on this episode. It felt like a full circle moment. And what I love most is that Mercury isn't just banking, it's operational confidence. I can send a wire to a podcast editor, I can check capital balances, and I can approve a payment for a freelancer who helped me with a tech stack report, all without bouncing across tabs or praying a PDF exported correctly. Mercury's making a bet on builders. Whether you're issuing your first invoice or wiring 7 figures for a warehouse build-out, it's banking that scales with your ambition. Visit Mercury.com to apply online in minutes and see why over 200,000, entrepreneurs choose Mercury to run their business finances smarter. Here comes my banking voice. Mercury is a financial technology company, not a bank. Banking services provided by Choice Financial Group, Column NA, Evolve Bank and Trust, members FDIC. The IO card is issued by Patriot Bank, members FDIC, pursuant to a license from MasterCard. All right, I got to get up on my soapbox for a sec here. Everybody's talking about AI-powered this and automated that. But here's the thing about revenue recognition. It's not just about moving data around. It's about getting it right, full stop. So RightRev is laser focused on one thing, RevRec that auditors actually trust. See, there's a difference between automating revenue processes and automating revenue recognition correctly. RightRev was actually built by the godfather of RevRec, who understands ASC 606 compliance, audit controls, data validation, and the flexibility needed for complex B2B contracts. We're not trying to be your billing system or your ERP. We're the revenue recognition engine that sits between your contracts and your financials, making sure every dollar is recognized correctly, on time, every time. Companies like Snowflake and Logic Monitor don't just need fast revenue reporting, they need revenue reporting that's audit ready from day one. And that's honestly where RightRev shines. And what I love about RightRev is they're not out there trying to be everything to everyone and just slap some, AI slop on top of it. While everyone is building these massive platforms that do everything in a kind of mediocre fashion, RightRev does one thing exceptionally well. They make sure your revenue recognition is bulletproof. Ready to stop gambling with your RevRec? Visit rightrev.com to see how we make complex revenue simple. That's rightrev.com, where revenue recognition actually works. Did you know that around 40% of manually processed invoices contain errors, missing data, bad codes, duplicates? And those mistakes don't just slow your finance team down, they cost you money. That's why global finance automation matters. It's not just about saving time, it's about keeping your business safe from costly errors. And that's exactly what Tipalti does. Tipalti is the serious AP solution for serious business. Tipalti automates the end-to-end payables process, handling everything from onboarding suppliers to global payouts, all so your finance team can breathe again. More than 5,000, of the world's most ambitious businesses already rely on Tipalti to make payments in over 200 countries and 120 currencies. With baked-in security and tax compliance, Tipalti gives you the confidence to scale globally without adding extra finance headcount. Give your finance team their time back. Don't let bad invoices drain good money. Visit tipalti.com/runthenumbers. Tipalti.com/runthenumbers. Tipalti, serious AP for serious business. Chirag, welcome to the podcast, my friend.
Thank you, CJ. Excited to be here.
I had a blast looking into your background because you've been at so many interesting companies at fascinating inflection points. And I kind of look at being a CFO as you're working at a company, you're trying to help them find product market fit, but you yourself have to find like where you operate well in terms of size, scale, type of company. And you've been at the helm for both private and public companies. How have you found your own product market fit?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I was hired right out of banking at Cornerstone to lead their IPO process. And at Motiv, which is a company I joined about 5 months ago, I've been tasked with basically doing the same thing, but I've actually spent most of my career in the public setting. And honestly, during that time, I experienced the entire gamut of, challenges that you could get hit by as a public company. We missed quarters, we had activist pressure, et cetera, which were all difficult things, but I learned a lot from all of those experiences. And so I would say for me, joining a company for the last leg of the private journey and helping them make that transition to the public markets is my product market fit, because I've got sort of that public perspective that I just talked about. But I also have experience at Cornerstone, having prepared that company to become a public company over a 2-year period. And so, that really is what I enjoy doing. It's extremely exciting for me to sort of help a team, often founders sort of take that next step, going from private to public. It's obviously a big milestone for any company to be able to do that. And I think given the experiences I've had, again, both in the private and public side, it just, fits me really well. And I think I can do it better now than I was able to do it at Cornerstone because I've got that public perspective and have learned from some of the mistakes we made at Cornerstone about what I would do now, is if I was taking a company public again, like I'm, trying to do here at Motiv, to get us even more prepared for that public journey. So that's kind of how I think about my product market fit. And, again, it is just, it's so much fun to be in a position where you're able to do that for a company that I'm excited about doing it here. And hopefully I'll get more chances to do it down the road.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Most people hope to have the chance to take a company public once in their career. You're kind of the guy, the man with the plan, Johnny on the spot with the playbook to come in and help a company do it once. And then, you can reuse that toolkit over time to re-implement it.
Yeah, totally. I mean, look, there's a lot of learnings, right? When I went through it at Cornerstone, we did some really good things. We did some things that I wish I would have done differently. And again, as I was saying, I mean, when you're actually a public company and you kind of, experience some challenges, you think about like what you could have done as a private company to better prepare yourself for avoiding those challenges the next time around. And so again, I just think the experiences that I've had, that combination of, again, public and private, is just a really, really good, a good set of sort of experiences to enable me to think through how to take a company public and make sure it's properly prepared for that journey. Because, the point, obviously, it's a huge milestone, as I talked about, going public, and it's exciting for any founder, any team to be able to experience. But the point is to be a successful public company, right? You want to get out and be really successful as a public company, hopefully, beat and raise every quarter. And that requires a lot of preparation, requires a lot of work. It requires some foresight into, what could cause the business to maybe miss their numbers. And so I think, I've again experienced some of those things as a public company executive and CFO. And, there are definitely some learnings from that would enable me to, take a company public and be more prepared in doing so the next time around. So that's, again, what I'm hoping to do at Motive. That's why I'm here. But I really enjoy it and just love being part of those journeys with companies. And so I'm excited to hopefully, again, do it multiple more times in my career going forward.
Hell yeah. And we're going to get to IPO readiness and public company life. But before we get there, what I noticed is when you spent time at Cornerstone on the true operating side as a GM, a general manager of several business units there, and like career finance professionals, that's not always like a tried and true path, but it did give you a chance to expand your skill set. Can you talk me through why you decided to make that move and how maybe it helped you as a CFO?
Yeah, absolutely. It was interesting because this happened around sort of 2016 when I made that transition away from the finance side to, as you called it, the true operating side of the business, and became a general manager. And I did it. It was intentional. I did it because what I had experienced up to that point was basically just, the finance perspective on how to build a business, right, and how to run teams. And I didn't really have a good understanding of what it's like on the other side, of the table. And so I wanted to sit in the seat of my peers. I wanted to get a sense for, what it's like to run a sales team, a marketing team, a product team, a development team. And as the general manager of a few different business units at Cornerstone, I ran, our APJ business, I ran our SMB business, I ran we had a content business as well that I ran. And I got to do all those things. Like I was in, customer meetings trying to, sell our product. I was in meetings with, our product and development teams, sort of riffing on how we can make our product better. And, I just learned a lot. I literally was, when I first started that job, I had no idea what I was doing. I was watching YouTube videos on marketing. I remember like my first couple of months on that job, I just literally didn't know what I was doing, and I was learning on the job. I was fortunate to have a CEO and a team that supported, a finance guy like myself in terms of making that transition. But, I tried to learn quickly. I had a great team around me that was willing to help me learn. As I learned and sort of understood better, like what that role is like, when I made the transition back to the finance side, it just made me a better CFO, right? Because I carried all that perspective with me when I came back. And it was really helpful to understand, again, how my peers think about their respective areas and the business partnership that I was able to achieve with, when I was CFO at Cornerstone, my CRO, my CMO, my CPO, Chief Product Officer, et cetera, was just much stronger as a result of some of the takeaways from that experience.
You didn't only get to carry perspective, you're essentially also carrying a quota or a top line goal.
It was. Yeah. Yeah, I was carrying a bag. It was fun to do that. I felt the pressure, that my CRO and my sales leaders feel, every quarter when I was in that role, and I have, just much better empathy for what they have to deal with and the things that are, both within their control but outside of their control, right? When you're a CFO, or when you're a finance leader and you haven't had that experience, you sometimes don't appreciate like how difficult those jobs are and what actually happens when you're in the trenches. And so again, having done that, like you actually realize that this isn't as easy as I thought it might be, and there's some things that you can't always control. And so again, you get more empathetic about how difficult those jobs are, but it enables you to just partner more effectively to solve problems and to make them more successful at what they're doing. So I love that experience. It was one of the sort of formative experiences in my career, and again, the learnings that came from that have helped me tremendously as a CFO. I think every finance professional, if you have an opportunity, you should try to get away from finance for a little bit and experience, again, true operating side of the business, do something in sales or marketing or product or what have you, just to give you a different perspective on the business, because it really does help you in your role as a finance. You're not going to, your finance skills, you're going to have those. And when you come back to the finance side, you're going to be able to leverage them the same way you did before, moving away from the finance side for a little bit. But you will do so with added perspective on what it takes to be effective in other areas of the business. And that is what, being a finance leader, honestly, is all about, right? You want to support your team across every area of the business effectively. And it's not just obviously about managing the books. And I think when you have those experiences like I've been able to gain, it really benefits you in terms of doing that.
Hey, thanks for listening. We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors. So if you listen to this podcast, you'll know that I am incredibly passionate about the FP&A space because that's the route I went to get to CFO. And I want to tell you about a tool that has exploded over the past few years. It's called Aleph. And I remember getting outbounded by them about 2.5 years ago, and I actually took the bait because they claimed to be able to do a demo with my live data, with me right there on the call. So I had to see it to believe it. And it was the founder running demos back then. Shout out Albert, hope you're listening. And he connected my NetSuite and built my P&L using their Excel add-in in like 15 minutes. And I was really impressed. Since then, Aleph has gone on to raise money from some of the top VCs out there, and they've built an impressive roster of customers. Many of their customers have been on the podcast, like the CFO at Turo, 8 Sleep, and Zapier. They're all really big champions and supporters of Aleph like me. But it's not just an Excel add-in. Aleph also allows finance teams to work with their live cross-system data using Google Sheets and their web app. And that's cool because it gives teams the option to support a wide range of needs and workflows like budgeting, forecasting, and variance analysis. And speaking of variance analysis, they're doing some really cool things with AI-powered variance analysis. It basically allows you to figure out what's going on and why, and it takes the time that you'd usually spend from hours to minutes. It's really cool. And so I highly recommend checking them out and taking them up on that demo or trial, just like I did back in the day. And you can learn more and get started at getaleph.com/run. That is getaleph.com. aleph.com/run. Tell them CJ sent you. A messy or missing cap table might not just slow you down, it could cost you your next fundraising round. VCs get flooded with pitches, and if your equity is confusing or missing, they'll move on fast. Fidelity Private Shares is an all-in-one equity management platform that helps you maintain a clean cap table, an organized data room, and a clear equity story. Schedule a demo at fidelityprivateshares.com. Mention Mostly Metrics and get 20% off. You just launched your new AI product. The new pricing page looks great. I'm talking crisp. But behind it, last-minute glued code, messy spreadsheets, and running ad hoc queries to figure out what to bill. Customers get invoices they can't understand. Engineers are chasing billing bugs. Finance can't close the books. Well, with Metronome, you hand it all off to the real-time billing infrastructure that just works. Reliable, flexible, and built to grow with you. They turn raw usage events into accurate invoices, give customers bills they actually understand, and keep every team in sync in real time. Whether you're launching usage-based pricing, managing enterprise contracts, or rolling out new AI services, Metronome does the heavy lifting so you can focus on your product, not your billing. That's why some of the fastest growing companies in the world like OpenAI and Anthropic run their billing on Metronome. Visit metronome.com to learn more. That's metronome.com. The word that I was going to use was also empathy, because I think sales is the hardest job in the world. I'm curious, do you think it made you better at asking questions when you got back to the finance side?
Yeah, I mean, I think it did, because I think I was able to understand what questions to ask better, right? Like I appreciated, better how sales cycles work, and what is, again, within the control of a sales leader and what's not. So I think you can ask the questions that actually matter better, because you have a better appreciation for what, again, they can control and what they can't. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, it gave me the ability to understand, what I can actually help the sales team with. And those are the questions that I typically ask, right? It's like, okay, what can we do better? Or what can I as CFO help you with to get this deal across the line, or to help you achieve your target, or quarter for the quarter. And so absolutely, like the questions that I've, been able to ask and the way I've been able to support my team has just been much more aligned with what actually, works for them and what actually can move the needle for them versus, again, when I was, just a finance person, before that who hadn't had that experience, you're looking at numbers and you're trying to sort of understand why something is or isn't happening purely based on numbers. And that's only part of the story, right? And so when you actually, again, sit in their seat, you just get better perspective on what they're actually dealing with day to day and what's driving those numbers in terms of actions that can be taken to deliver the outcomes you're looking for.
There's kind of a joke or a meme of VCs being helpful, like, hey, how can I help? But I also think that CFOs at times are guilty of that too. Like just going to the marketing lead, like, how can I be helpful? And you hitting your number this quarter. But by operating and like sitting next to them and working on the exact same goals and actually, or having to actually bring a product to market with the CPO, you start to actually come up with the ways to be helpful so they don't have to fill in the blanks.
Totally. 100%. 100%.
I want to talk about pattern recognition for a second because from digging through your resume, it looks like you've scaled companies from around 30 million to around $1 billion in revenue and at times tripled ARR. How do you recognize when a company is ready to accelerate and what financial signals will help you confidently put your foot on the gas as a CFO?
Yeah, totally. Well, I mean, I think the first thing that you need is to feel confident about the size of the market and the product market fit, right? Like, is your product solving a problem that many more companies around the world are experiencing? And if the answer to that is yes, then you need to assess, well, how well is your sales team performing and how much incremental capacity can it handle? That it really is like the set of questions that I ask myself when I think about scaling and doing so in a way that I feel confident about is, like is our product winning consistently or do clients have a good experience with it? And do we have the ability to add more resourcing to our sales team to address more of the opportunity that exists out there? And, often what I'm looking at is what's the performance of my sales team? If your sales team is performing at a high level, then you can feel reasonably confident that there's probably additional capacity that you can add to and have them continue to perform at a high level. So, have a good level of efficiency in terms of what you're spending or investing in terms of sales and marketing dollars and what you're getting out of it. And so, I really focus on that. And obviously, you look at other things too. I mean, you want to make sure that, when you're investing in the right markets. And so you look at, sort of like LTV to CAC and those kinds of efficiency ratios. But the first two questions that I reference are basically the crux of what I try to think about when I'm assessing like where I want to put my money to work and whether or not that's the right thing to do for the business. And if I'm feeling good about those two questions, then there's a lot of other financial data that you look at to kind of titrate those investments and be more specific about where you put your money to work. But it gives you confidence that, okay, there is opportunity to be had here. And the investments that we're going to make against that opportunity are going to be high ROI.
We saw that Wiz just sold to Google for $32 billion, and a lot of people were doing retrospectives on that hyper growth. And I heard this one anecdote. I don't want to be apocryphal here, but I think it was during the time where they went from like 200 to 400 million in 12 months, 18 months, like unheard of growth. And they were asking the CRO, how'd you know how many sales reps to add? And he's like, there was nothing to benchmark it against. We were literally just looking at sales rep calendars and being like, yeah, that person can't take any more meetings.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly right. Like, that's what I was kind of referencing, right? Is like when you see somebody who is at see a team that's at 120, 130, 150% of quota, they're, I mean, yeah, you can raise their quotas and, and all that, but I mean, they're probably at capacity in terms of what they can do or how much they can sell. And that, dovetails into, what you were referencing, which is they're probably taking a ton of meetings to be able to put themselves in a position where they're able to achieve that level of performance. And so, yeah, it gives you a good sense that people are just tapped out and there's opportunity to be had that is probably being left on the table because, the people that you have currently can only do so much. And so that kind of leads you to think that, okay, you can add more resources and again, take better advantage of the opportunity that exists in the market. So I think that Wiz example is is one that I wish I'd experienced more often, because, Wiz has had an incredible journey, and not a lot of companies have been through that. But it's the right way to think about scaling, right? Which is like when you have kind of that challenge that they had, where, their people couldn't take more meetings. It's very clear that, like, if you had more people and if you could take more meetings, you'd probably be selling more, right? And so that's exactly how you want to think about adding capacity, is when you feel like your team is tapped out, and is doing as much as they can, you should be adding. I think that, it's also like important to make sure that as you're thinking about scaling, you're thinking about the supporting resources around your sales team, right? You want to make sure that you're not just thinking about, okay, how many account executives, as we call them at Motive, you can add, but also, is the team, is enablement, are all the resources that support your sales team, are they set up to handle additional capacity? Because you have to scale all of those in parallel with adding additional resources. And so that, that sort of sometimes doesn't happen, and can cause breakage in terms of scaling a sales organization. Is like, if you're adding a bunch of reps, but you don't have the people to support those reps, you're going to end up having reps who probably see a dip in performance as a result of that. And that's not good. So, you've got to think about all the different components of scaling. But I think, again, the sort of fundamental questions that you ask yourself in terms of arriving at the decision of whether or not to push the gas, as you put it, are, pretty straightforward.
I think the best CFOs have kind of this sixth sense of when they should start adding reps too, because there is the art and there is the science. Like, you can build operating models with sales capacity in it till the cows come home, but it's like, okay, do I feel it here? Is it in the air? Should I start adding reps? Because people sometimes forget that you can't just hire a rep off the street. They're going to be productive on day one.
Yeah, totally. And one of the things that I do is I call the sales team, and I talk to, sales leaders, not just the CRO, but like, if I called my RVP, of the East, and said, hey, if I gave you, a few more reps, like, how would you feel about that? Right. And I've been in situations where some of those sales leaders have had a very adverse reaction to adding reps. And I've been in other scenarios where sales leaders are like, yeah, give me all you can give me, because I have, so much opportunity out there. And I feel like I'm just, losing deals by default because I'm not in them, because I don't have enough people. And I love that latter answer, right? Like, if you have a sales leader, a second line sales leader, what have you, that tells you, hey, I have all this opportunity that I'm not able to capture, that makes me as a CFO incredibly excited, because it tells me that, my financial model and sort of my desire to add, reps aligns with what the team is actually feeling. And a big part of this, right, is like, you want to make the team feel excited about adding and scaling their teams. And if they feel like, hey, we don't have enough leads, and we're just going to be stretching ourselves thinner and thinner and thinner by adding more reps, then you really have to think about whether or not that's the right thing to do for your business. And so, I really do, want to hear the voice of the sales team when we make these decisions, because ultimately they're the ones who have to sell, their organization on the additional capacity we're adding. And you want to keep people excited, and you want to keep the momentum up. And if you're, adding too much headcount, you can sometimes hurt the momentum or the enthusiasm of the sales team, and that's not what you want. So by getting the buy-in from the sales team and making sure you check that, you have a pulse of that before you make that decision to add additional headcount, is super important.
Yeah, I had a friend who used to say, at the end of the day, if the sales reps aren't getting paid, ain't nobody happy.
Exactly. That's exactly right. So yeah, I mean, you want to make sure, like, they believe that the decisions that you're making are the right decisions. And, the sales reps are also, like, right at the front lines of these customer conversations. And so they have a feel for the market that honestly is just different from anyone in my seat being able to have. Like, I can't, as a CFO, get as close. I'm not as close as my sales leaders and sales reps are to the customer. And so making sure that, like, we check that pulse. Like I said, we're talking to them and getting a feel for, like, how they feel about the decisions we're making, how they feel about, product market fit. Going back to the other, question that I said I'd asked myself, right? Like, is your product, solving a problem that more companies around the world or in your geography are experiencing? If they're, like, super confident about that, like the product market fit and the opportunity that our product has, that also speaks volumes about, about your ability to continue to scale, right? So I like to talk to the sales team a lot. I like to attend QBRs and just, get a feel for how they're feeling, because it gives you a really, really good perspective on a lot of things that can drive growth in the future.
Chirag, I want to go back to something you said about scaling, and it was related to the knock-on effects on other teams and the ratios, like a sales pod. Where in the org do things tend to break first, or what groups tend to get forgotten when you're just adding a ton of sales reps?
Yeah, I mean, I think, for me, in the world that I've lived in for the past, I don't know, 20 years, enterprise sales, it's enablement, I think, that often is not appropriately invested in, right? So you have to have enough enablement resources to be able to train your people effectively when you add them. And I think, often just gets overlooked. Like you think they can just, train as many people as you bring in. And that's not the case. It's just like any other, function. There's a capacity or a limit to how many additional AEs they can handle, or additional people they can handle training. And so you have to be really thoughtful about, again, scaling that org and making sure you have good people, in a good enablement program, right? It's not just about adding headcount in that org, but it's about having an enablement program that you're confident is working well, continuously finding ways to improve it. Because, a big part of getting, good return on your sales and marketing investments, and specifically investments in sales resources is how quickly can you get them up and running, right? How quickly can you get them ramped up, as we like to say in kind of the world of sales. And having an enablement team that you trust and that is really good at what they do is super important. So you have to staff that team appropriately. I think that in addition to that, the supporting resources that I was referencing, like, solution engineers or solution consultants, depending on your company, you may call them one or the other, but those are resources that partner with your sales folks to help position your product and are usually, subject matter experts in your product. Making sure you have enough of those resources is critical as well. Like if a salesperson, is not able to get that support when they're, trying to position the product for or with a prospect, then you're just not going to have an effective conversation with the prospect that you're interacting with, and you may end up losing that opportunity, right? So, those are two examples of areas that I think you need to have appropriately, invested in to make sure that your sales, your investments in AEs are going to actually produce good return for you. I think the last one that I would call out, and I think it's really, really important, is sales leadership. Like you have to have ratios that make sense. You can't have sales leaders who are managing, 10, 15 AEs. There's a limit to how many folks they can manage and be effective with. So if you really want to, ensure that you have good productivity out of your salespeople and they're getting the support that they need from leadership, you have to make sure your leadership is not stretched too thin. And so, like making sure that you're adding good seasoned leaders alongside of the additional, direct sales headcount that you're adding is really important.
And like timing is everything. Budgeting for extra system engineers, like we need one for every 2 enterprise reps or something. That's step one, but making sure you have them in place at the right time. And I've over rotated in both directions where we were adding all these reps. It's like, oh crap, we need to actually hire some SEs here. And then we were like, let's correct for this, where we hire the SEs 2 months before the rep starts. That way they're already trained to help the rep. And it was like, now we just have slack capacity and people sitting around.
Yeah, and sometimes that's not a bad thing, right? I mean, honestly, like I hear you on that, but I also like you want to make sure, like SEs, they typically take longer to ramp than sales folks do, because they need to be
Technical
matter experts. Exactly. So it's okay to have some, some slack capacity, some capacity that isn't being leveraged for some period of time, if you know that it's going to allow you to better leverage the capacity that you add down the road. And so sometimes we make those kinds of decisions and we accept that, okay, maybe our ratios are a little bit off. We have too many SCs for now, but we're going to help, we're going to fill that out with additional sales headcount in the near future. So yeah, I mean, I think as long as you're doing that and why you have that inefficiency and that it's temporary and it's serving a purpose, it's fine to have that for some period of time. But yeah, I mean, it's, it just is really like all these supporting resources that we just talked about. Like it is, it's a unit that allows you to have a successful sales organization. It's not just looking at, data as it relates to your salespeople. You have to have a unit that functions well together and making sure that you're kind of thinking through how to staff that overall unit as you want to scale your sales organization is super critical to just sustaining momentum on the sales side. So
yeah.
that is, something that, we spend a lot of time on, is like looking at those ratios and just thinking about the sales organization holistically to ensure that, we're not, breaking anything as we keep adding headcount.
We're going to move on to IPO readiness in a sec, but just two observations from my career that I've had a hard time getting right. Number of recruiters you need at any given time, because they're basically a capacity model as well. So you can't just have the same exact size recruiting team.
Yeah.
And then the number of interviews that a sales manager has to do in a day. Like, are they no longer helping their team? They're just interviewing people all day.
Yeah. 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 No, you totally have to you have to have good recruiters, and you have to, make sure you're, managing the interview load for your sales leaders for sure. I've definitely had situations where sales leaders have felt overwhelmed by, the ramp up of their sales team, the number of interviews they have to do. And I've had recruiters who haven't been able to keep up with what sales leaders are trying to do in terms of adding headcount. So yeah, you have to, that's all part of the equation too, is do you have enough recruiters? Like, you have to constantly ask yourself, where is the bottleneck? Like, where are you getting held up when you're trying to add headcount? Is it that we just can't interview this many people? Is it that we can't bring this many people into the top end of the funnel? And you have to keep solving for those problems, right? It's an iterative process. It's one where, as you're trying to staff up your team, you're just continuously looking at, again, what's holding you back from, getting to where you want to get to. And sometimes you have to add a recruiter. Sometimes you have to support the sales leaders with interviewing candidates to help you move that along more quickly and not overwhelm them, so that, to your point, CJ, they can do their day job. They can actually help the salespeople that they have get deals across the line. So it's not easy. It's pretty complex, and there's a lot of different elements to it. But it's one of those things where you just have to continuously stay close to your recruiting team, your sales team, and clear bottlenecks as they pop up.
I want to talk about IPO readiness and living the public company life. It's not like you just go and it's all rosy. After that, you still have to operate as a public company. When you're preparing to go public, Chirag, what's the longest pole in the tent from your perspective? There's a lot that's got to get done, but what's the longest pole?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's definitely, for me, financial visibility and predictability. There are, as you said, so many things you need to do to be a successful public company. But if you don't have the ability to predict your performance with a high level of accuracy, you're not going to be a successful public company. And so, while strong performance is important, I've always had this sort of point of view that you can still garner a great valuation in the public markets, even without the strongest performance, if investors know they can bank on your business executing consistently every quarter. And so,
can you say more about that? That's really interesting.
Yeah, I've seen over the years, companies from a valuation perspective, it's not always that the absolute best performing companies are the highest valued. I mean, obviously there's a very strong correlation to, having high growth rates and having, a good level of efficiency, and that often drives valuation. But, if you have those things, but if an investor doesn't know what they can expect out of your company in the next quarter or the quarter after that, then it's going to set you back, right? That's my point. So you want to ideally have both. But you absolutely, if you're not going to be that sort of highest performing company in the public markets, that's okay, as long as you have a level of predictability where an investor can come to their team and say, hey, I love this business, I love this stock, because I know that every quarter this management team is going to execute. They're going to put up numbers, and they're going to beat their guidance, and they're going to raise, right? And you can't say that about every company. I know at times when I was at Cornerstone, we had stretches where I think investor confidence in our ability to guide accurately was not as high as I would have liked. And so, I think that is incredibly important in terms of just, driving valuation and making sure that your company is getting as much credit as they can by investors, is creating that level of confidence that this company is just well run. It has a really good handle on what it's going to achieve in any given quarter or year. And when they say they're going to do something, they're going to do it.
If you had to ballpark it, what's the not too hot, not too cold sweet spot for earnings guidance? Because I've heard people say that you want to be within 3% on the good side. You want to beat by about 3%. But if you blow it out of the water and you beat by 12%, that's also not great, because they're going to be you don't have a handle on your business.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You can, every public company CFO sandbags, but you can't, completely sandbag, 10, 12%, as you suggested, and get away with that, because you're going to be viewed as someone who doesn't understand your business very well. And, you also don't want to keep it too tight, because then, I mean, you just have much more risk for missing guidance, which is the worst thing that can happen. And so, yeah, I think the 2 to 3% range is probably the right range. I mean, I think it depends on, your business a little bit too. Like once you get bigger and you have better predictability or less variability, I think that percentage goes down. When you're a little bit smaller and maybe have a little bit more variability in your numbers in a given quarter, then the number may need to be a little bit higher, right? Because you just need to account for the potential risk that again goes away as you scale and as you have more volume in the case of our business, right? And as you have, again, more predictability because of that scale.
I always find that interesting, just like the law of big numbers, that a company that's at scale like an Apple, they could be 500 million off and it's like a drop in the bucket. Not that like people wouldn't react negatively or anything, but like that 3 or 4 million when you just IPO, like you better hit the ball to the pin.
Yeah, it's exactly right. It definitely changes the numbers, the magnitude of what a miss is defined as definitely changes as you get bigger. So yeah, I mean, when you're smaller, you have much less room for error in that, like, in our case, like here at Motive, right? We're not that small, but every deal matters, or large deals can potentially swing the quarter. It can it can take it from a good quarter to a bad quarter, and obviously when you're a much bigger business, one deal is probably gonna not make that big of a difference in terms of the overall performance of the quarter. And so that's why I said what I did earlier, which is you typically want to manage to a little bit more, sort of have a little bit more cushion in your number when you're a little smaller, because those big deals that you're doing, they can swing the numbers obviously much more meaningfully when you're smaller than they will when you're larger. And so you just need to account for that and be thoughtful about how you're setting guidance based on again that potential variability.
And that's the beauty of SaaS, right? That like as you get larger, it's predictable and then even more predictable. And I was amazed by how some of these marketplace and usage-based or transaction-based models are still like within, call it 1 or 2 percentage points more on their range. So it just goes to show, like, you just have to intimately know the rhythm and the engine size of your business.
Yeah, totally. SaaS is great because you have, these sort of contracts that give you awesome revenue visibility. And so that, I think that really helps make setting guidance much easier than I think it otherwise would be for all of us in the world of SaaS. But, you still have, I mean, most of the SaaS businesses that are public, they're growing at a relatively fast clip, right? And so they are, if you're guiding a revenue, which most are, you're probably adding a fair amount of new ARR in the quarter that's driving revenue. And so that is something that, even though you have all this revenue that's coming from customers that you already have, that is sort of baked into your quarterly or annual number, you do still have to have a pretty good sort of sense for what you're going to do in a given quarter, because the growth rates are high, and that incremental revenue that you're bringing on board in a given quarter can be pretty meaningful and can move your results from beating or missing guidance if you're not super titrated with having for. So you just have to make sure even with that sort of visibility, again, which is a huge benefit for SaaS businesses, you still have to be really dialed in terms of how you forecast the business, because the growth is there, and that growth can meaningfully impact the overall results of the business.
So thematically, predictability of your business model is a long pole in the tent. If I was to be super tactical and think about the actual timeline and tasks that need to be done on the road to IPO, is there something that takes the longest or is the biggest headache?
I think look, predictability is probably, like, creating that sort of confidence and predictability is probably what takes the longest. There's a lot of other things. I think,
like, does drafting the S1 take a while, or is that like pretty quick?
Yeah,
Just you have GPT it, right?
Yeah, you have a lot of support to do that, right? You have good bankers who will help you do that. So, I mean, yes, it's definitely time consuming, and you have to be really thoughtful about how you articulate your story as part of the S1 drafting process. But, you do have a really good team around you to help you with that. So I think that's something that, it does take time and a lot of work, but it's not necessarily the longest part of what I would call the IPO preparation process. I think, one of the things that can take some time is you really want to, educate investors on your story early, so that, when you're going we're doing the roadshow and you're going and having those meetings with them, it's not the first time that they're hearing the story about your business. And you want to start on that early because, the more familiar and comfortable they are with your story, and the more you've demonstrated over time that you're able to do what you said you would, going back to my point earlier about sort of confidence in the company's ability to execute. Like if you have investors who you've spent time with leading up to your IPO that really understand the story well and have confidence in the management team's ability to execute as a public company, that's going to help the success rates of your IPO meaningfully, right? So that's another element of sort of how you prepare that I don't think is often talked about. We often will talk about a lot of the more tactical things about IPO preparation. Like, as you said, you got to draft the S1, obviously you have to add people and processes, and you have to have the right systems infrastructure in place. But I do think that sort of investor element of it and making sure the story is well understood and that they have, again, a high level of confidence in the investment they're making is really critical to success.
And that doesn't stop, right? Like after you go public, you still have to maintain that communication. It's a long game.
It totally is. It totally is. And so that is a big part of, as a public company CFO. I mean, I spent a lot of time with investors and making sure they understood the story, making sure they understood what the business was in the past, how it's changing going forward, how they can translate that into performance, expectations. So yeah, it's an ongoing part of the job and the process of being a public company. And it starts, again, it should start if you're, I think, doing it the right way well before you're public.
And let's talk about walking the walk once you are public. Cornerstone was public for a decade. Are there any underappreciated challenges of being a public SaaS company that outsiders may not see?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say there's a couple come to mind immediately. I mean, one is just that making significant changes to your business is much more difficult to do as a public company because you're not only thinking about, or you can't only think about it from the lens of what's best for the business. You also need to consider like how shareholders are going to interpret those changes, right? Your ability to effectively communicate what you're doing and why is really important as a public company, as we just talked about. And, as a private company, I mean, you're really just sort of making the decisions that are best for the business, right? And it's pretty simple. Like there's not this other or added element of like, okay, well, how is this going to be perceived? And how do we convey, this change that we're making in a way that's understandable for investors, and so that I think is a big a challenge that public companies face that is not something that everyone appreciates until you actually become a public company, right? And you realize that okay, this world that I'm living as a public company is a little bit different than that private world, and I can't just make these big changes on a whim. I have to be thoughtful about them, and I have to really understand how people are going to interpret them. So that's one, and then I think the other that comes to mind is just the sort of employee sentiment aspect of being a public company and how that can move as your stock price moves, right? Like your stock price, like days like today, where stock market's moving pretty significantly in a negative direction, can be really challenging for you as a public company because your employees are seeing the stock, go down, and they're asking questions. They're trying to understand what it means for them, what it means for the company's future, and that's just a daily thing that you have to sort of consider as a public company and manage with your employees. And it's not something that as a private company you have to do, right? Your valuation isn't changing, at least on you don't have a ticker symbol that's moving around every single day like you do as a public company. And so you don't have to deal with as much of that as a private company. But as a public company, it's just honestly, it can be a daily thing, especially in volatile markets like the one we're in right now. And, that can really be an additional set of, it can create an additional set of work for the entire executive team that you otherwise wouldn't have to deal with. And that is not easy. You have to know how to message things the right way to your employees to make sure they're confident in the business and aren't, losing faith because of what they're seeing on a given day in the stock market. But, again, it is something that you have to be really thoughtful about managing.
And I got to say, guiding Cornerstone later through a $5.2 billion sale to Clearlake, that's no small feat either, right? So you took company public, then you took it private. What made the timing right for that transaction? What were some of the biggest hurdles, financial or emotional?
Yeah, I mean, the business growth at Cornerstone had been slowing for some time. So I think, there was a sense that, okay, we probably could benefit from taking this company private, making some changes, and maybe, taking it back out at some
SailPoint did that.
SailPoint did that, right? And they had a great outcome, and I think they benefited a lot from Toma and the relationship with Toma and making some changes as a private company that allowed them to create an even more compelling story as a public company the second time around. So I think for Cornerstone, business growth was slowing. Obviously, in 2021, when we sold the business, multiples, in SaaS had reached all-time highs, and interest rates had also reached all-time lows. We knew that the outcome for Cornerstone was likely to be a PE transaction, right? That was something that we sort of, felt was going to be the likely home for Cornerstone. And so obviously, when you have really high multiples and really low interest rates for the shareholders of Cornerstone at the time, we felt like we could get a really good outcome by sort of considering a sale process. And obviously, we wanted to make sure we were doing always what's best for our shareholders. And that was what, myself, our CEO, and the board had agreed was the right course of action. So, that's why we decided to do it when we did it. The hurdles, financial hurdles, I wouldn't say with Cornerstone were any different than any other company sort of probably experiences when they go through a transaction like that. The emotional hurdles, I think, for us were pretty significant because we had a founder, Adam Miller, who's a great friend of mine and someone who was a mentor of mine for a long time and still is. He'd been the CEO from inception until 2020. We sold the business in 2021. And, at the time in 2021, he was chairman of the board. And so, when you make the decision to consider selling the company and run a process like we did, it's sort of like, for the founder, it's like, okay, I'm actually, now handing this business off to someone else to control, right? I mean, as chairman, you have some control. Obviously, as CEO, you have some control. But when you sell the business, you're handing the business off to Clearlake Capital, which is the private equity firm that we sold to. It's sort of a transition that puts the business entirely into someone else's hands. And I think that is emotional for any founder. It was for ours. I think it's challenging for any founder to sort of accept. It's a good outcome. It was a good outcome for us. Hopefully for most who go through a process like that, it's also considered a good outcome. But I think the emotional sort of weight of saying, okay, this is no longer my business. This business is now in the hands of someone else is a pretty big one and one that we had to get our founder comfortable with. And frankly, for me, as someone who had been in the business at that time for 12 years, I mean, it was a little emotional too, right? It was just a big change and something that was very different. I knew would be very different from what we had been doing as a public company for, 10 plus years, right? I'd been at the business overall for 12 years, but 10 years of that was in the public markets. And so moving again back to the private markets and having new ownership was obviously going to drive, some changes in terms of how we operated. And so that was emotional and, something that I had to get comfortable with as well.
Well, today, many companies are debating whether they should stay private longer or go public as the markets seem to open up here. We had, I think, 3 IPOs announced 3 Fridays in a row, which was pretty crazy. What advice would you give a CFO facing that decision?
Yeah, I mean, look, first of all, I think you just need to have good reasons for wanting to go public, right? I think that's the first thing that I would say to, sort of a CFO who's considering taking their company public is, do you need the access to capital? Do you need the brand visibility or credibility? Do you need liquidity for your shareholders? Is it going to help you attract employees, et cetera? Like, do you have good reasons for wanting to go public? I think you have to, answer those questions first and make sure that, you have reasons that make sense for going public. Assuming that the answer to some of those questions is yes, then it's really just a matter of timing. And what I would say to other CFOs is, take your time. I mean, make sure that when you go public, you're ready. The public markets, in my experience, can be unforgiving. And so you want to make sure that when you get out, you're going to be able to execute well as a public company, right? It's not just about going public. It's about putting yourself in a position where you can maintain the credibility of public market investors and hopefully build it, even further for a long period of time. And you have to have confidence in, some of the things we talked about earlier, right? Predictability of your business. Do you have the right people? Do you have the right systems, infrastructure, et cetera? But until you feel, fully confident in all of those things, I would I would wait, right? I mean, it's just you want to make sure that when you go out, you're taking advantage of that opportunity. You're putting yourself in a position where, again, that credibility that I talked about with investors is going to, be high and is going to keep getting higher and higher over time. And there's a lot to do in terms of preparation to enable yourself to be in that position. So, when you feel fully confident that that's where you are, then, and you have good reasons, as I talked about earlier, for wanting to go out or needing to go out as a public company, you should go for it.
It sounds like the speed of decision making in the private markets is much more appetizing. You can move a lot faster. I'm wondering though if the financial decision making shifts when you're optimizing for shareholders who are public company holders or retail investors versus private equity investors like a Clear Lake.
Yeah, I mean, I think it does a little bit, right? I mean, the reality is that growth, generally has a high correlation to valuation. Or higher correlation to valuation than cash flow or EBITDA in the public markets. So you're largely focused on that as you think about creating value for public shareholders, at least in the world of software. Obviously, it varies by industry, but
Sure.
Growth is what, like when you look at like some of these like analyses that banks do, the correlation to growth is and relative to valuation is really high. So, that is how you think about building a successful public company. And in the private equity world, clearly growth is still important, right? I mean, they're not buying these assets to, just sit there and run in place. But, they're also putting a lot of leverage on the businesses they acquire. That's the model. And so you need to drive a certain level of cash flow to be able to support that leverage. And so the approach to, building a business becomes a little bit more balanced, right? You have to think about kind of both sides of, okay, well, how do we continue growing, but how do we also generate meaningful cash flow so that we can support the debt load that we're putting on the business? And so there's just a different thought process around it. Now, I will say, and this isn't directly related to your question, but a comment in terms of just, being under the private equity umbrella and some of the benefits of that. I mean, I think there's, a lot that businesses can learn. And I'm sure, SailPoint, if you were to talk to that team, would probably, support this. Like you can make your business a better business, by being under the private equity umbrella in some cases, because, you're often just not like scrutinizing your spend or don't have as much of an appreciation for best practice in terms of how to manage your cost structure as, private equity firms do, right? Because they've seen a lot of companies work with a lot of them to optimize and find ways to do as much as they can to improve the cost structure of the business. And so, I think there's a lot of benefit to being under a private equity firm, learning from them, learning from what they've seen with other companies. And, it doesn't necessarily always require a trade-off and growth, right? I think that's, sometimes the sort of misconception that people have is that like,
Yeah, it's either or.
yeah, exactly. Like you're going to have to, to be more profitable, you have to trade off some growth. And that's not necessarily the case, right? You can find efficiencies that allow you to be more profitable, and they may be in areas that don't really impact growth. And I think private equity firms have a really acute understanding of that and can really help businesses optimize in ways that, you as an operator who maybe hasn't worked with a private equity firm before wouldn't have been able to, sort of pick up on your own.
Chirag, when you're at a company that's in hypergrowth mode and hiring all these people to go and sell the product, sometimes the focus is just revenue, top line, top line, top line. But you're the CFO, you got to balance it all. How do you also look out for the bottom line and maintain efficient growth?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, CJ, I think the biggest part of creating and maintaining financial discipline is educating your employees on why that's important. I don't think companies invest enough in doing that. And as a result of that, most companies, have employees that don't really appreciate that efficiency and not just growth is a big driver of creating shareholder value, right? And at the companies that I've worked for, every employee is a shareholder. So one of the things that I've done at every company I've been at is during all hands meetings, I will actually steal slides that the investment bank send me that show things like the correlation of valuation to the rule of 40 and use them to help employees understand why efficiency is important. I mean, I think when they see that illustrated and they sort of appreciate how, efficiency can actually drive the value of their shares up over time, it really gets them more invested in that process. And it makes things much, much easier for the finance team, right? That's the reason why I do it is because, if I'm just telling everybody that, hey, we've got to be efficient and they don't actually have the context behind why that matters, it's really difficult to drive. You need everyone to be on that boat with you and, educating employees. And again, I thank all the investment banks that I have relationships with for giving me these awesome slides every quarter to help me kind of frame what's going on in the markets and why this is important. It really does help you tremendously when you're sort of educating your employees with achieving the outcomes that you're trying to do on the efficiency side. And so I again have done that at every stop. I will do it probably at every stop going forward. It's just a really, I think, important part of, again, getting employees invested in the process of creating the right balance between growth and efficiency and being thoughtful about how they allocate capital.
That's great for two reasons. One, because you don't have to build the slide yourself. So shout out to the analysts with all the logos moving them around at midnight on the market map. And two, like as a CFO, sometimes you feel like you're saying it till your face is blue. It's like, it's nice to have a third party come in and sometimes be like, look, they're saying this too. This is what makes a valuable company.
Yeah, totally. Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, all those banks have much more credibility than I do. And so when I can reference their slides and say, hey, these are the folks, these smart folks over at these banks that are telling us that this is what we should do, it definitely carries more weight. So I again, try to do that as often as I can. And I found it to be really impactful. And people actually, appreciate it because I think a lot of employees are yearning for more of an understanding for why, whatever business is being run the way it is, right? Like why are, the metrics that we're targeting what they are? Why are we so focused on, generating cash flow in the case of, Motive? And so getting the context around that and leveraging slides and sort of illustrations that can help you understand why, again, it matters is just super impactful.
And I think they appreciate that you're investing in them and also treating them like an adult, right? Like, here, I'm going to show you some information that you can absorb and you can make your own, observation off of it.
Yeah, no, exactly right. I mean, I think they want to know, like, they want to understand what I'm or how I'm thinking about things, right? And so I think, getting a little bit of that perspective by sharing more than you might otherwise really makes them just feel better about, again, the business strategy and, like you said, feeling like they're well informed and are being treated as adults.
Nice. Chirag, I'm going to take you into what we call our long ass lightning round. So what are some of the things you've done during your career that best prepared you for life as a CFO?
Yeah, I mean, I think, one of them was what we talked about earlier, which is just having a stretch on the true operating side of the business at Cornerstone and learning, sales and marketing and product and development and customer success and all these areas, directly, right? With like a hands-on sort of experience with dealing with some of those areas. So I think that's number one. And again, the empathy that helped me develop for how difficult some of those jobs are was tremendous. I think the other is, investor relations. Like I had to do IR when I was like 25 or 26 years old. I was, sitting in front of investors at conferences and doing fireside chats with sell side analysts, at conferences, like, pretty often. Cornerstone had just gone public and I had taken a lot of that on and it was really difficult initially because I had no idea what I was doing, but got thrown in the fire, had to figure it out. And, that experience gave me a ton of perspective on how investors think about, businesses, what they value, what they don't like. And I was able to marry kind of some of that perspective that I gained doing IR with this sort of very, in the weeds experience that I had, working at Cornerstone and managing FP&A and some of the other functions that I was managing at the time. Right. So that was tremendously beneficial for me because it helped me with, again, understanding the investor perspective, but it also helped me with learning how to position the story of Cornerstone and frame the narrative. And that's obviously something that's really important, right? As a finance leader, like when you're private, but especially when you're public, I mean, you're doing that constantly. Like you're always selling, right? You're always framing the story for investors and trying to, help them understand what you're doing and why it's important and why it's going to be a big thing down the road. And you have to, it's a skill that you have to develop and it requires practice. And for me, being able to do what I did in IR at such a young age and kind of getting thrown in the fire, it was a really, really good experience and something that taught me a lot. And I think has benefited me tremendously, as a CFO. So, that's something that for like anyone who is, aspiring to be a CFO, I would recommend try to get some experience with. I know, you have to understand the business. You have to do a lot of other things, to sort of prepare yourself to be a CFO. But that is one of the more critical elements, I think, of being a successful CFO is just, getting some experience with interfacing with investors and articulating your story.
Understanding the business and then clearly communicating it to somebody else, it's kind of like rented knowledge versus like own knowledge. And I think IR really teases that out of people.
Totally. Yep.
If you could tell your younger self something knowing what you know today, what would you tell them?
I would tell my younger self to leverage people that have been there and done it before to avoid potholes that you could otherwise, would otherwise hit. I mean, I think that I learned by doing a lot, and you have to do that. But I also think that there were some things that some mistakes that I could have avoided making had I leveraged, my network more, had I leveraged, CFOs who had been there and done it before more than I had. And so when I look back, I wish I would have done that more, right? I wish I would have reached out to, seasoned CFOs and gotten their perspective more than I had, because I just think that there are so many, things that companies can go through that other companies have gone through before. And, if you're able to sort of tease out that perspective from another CFO or, CEO, whatever position you're in, you can, it can help you do those things better and maybe avoid some mistakes that others have made in the past. So, that's probably the biggest thing that I would tell my younger self. And by the way, that's why podcasts like this one are so great, right? Because you can hear from folks who have been there and done it before and gain some perspective that'll hopefully help you do your job a little bit better.
That's the biggest aha from this podcast, that I'd always have like this. The inertia is real to reach out to somebody who's important, has done it before. And you think in your head, well, they're so busy, like how would they have time to talk to me?
Yeah.
But I found there's actually this inverse relationship, that the higher up and more tenured somebody is, the more they're willing to give back because they recognize the importance of it.
Absolutely. I mean, I've worked with, some really good CFOs, and I've been fortunate to meet a lot of great CFOs at various, events, CFO events that I go to, conferences, or just sort of generally being out there in the finance world. And yeah, I think you're exactly right, CJ. Like they've largely been just super helpful and wanting to actually give advice and support and do the things that they can to kind of help you, do things better than you might otherwise, right? So yeah, I found the network to be incredibly supportive. I'm grateful for that. And again, I think, for the younger professionals out there, leverage that network early, learn as much as you can from it. Don't try to figure everything out yourself, because chances are most of the things that you're trying to figure out, there's someone out there who's done it before and they can help you think through it and help you get to where you're trying to get to faster and more effectively.
Nice. More of a technical one. Can you walk me through your finance software stack? What tools does your team use to get the job done?
Yeah, I mean, we use, I've been at Motive for 5 months, so I'll talk to you generally about some of the tools that I've used. I mean, I've used NetSuite now at 3 different places, Exactly for commissions, use Flowcast for close management, Coupa, Workiva, Navan, which isn't necessarily just a finance tool. Yeah, I mean, lots of solutions. Those are probably,
Those are some great ones.
Yeah. And I've used, most of those multiple times over, it's like NetSuite, as I mentioned, multiple times, Flowcast, multiple times, Coupa, multiple times, Workiva, multiple times. So yeah, I'm a repeat buyer of many of those tools and a big fan of all of them.
We've had some of their CFOs in the pod. Some of them sponsor it. The rest should also sponsor the pod. All right, Chirag, last one I got for you. What's the craziest thing you've ever had an employee try to expense?
Yeah, honestly, CJ, nothing too crazy. I wish I had some wild story for you, but I think the craziest thing that I have come across is I had an employee once who was traveling internationally, and they lost their luggage, and they used that to try to expense some very expensive clothes while they were on a business trip for us, and those clothes were when I say expensive, they were very pricey. They were like and designer clothing that I'm not sure was what their bag was entirely filled with. So yeah, that was probably the most egregious thing that I've seen.
Look good, feel good. That's how you close the deals,
Yes, that's very true. That is absolutely right. You got to look good.
Chirag, I can't thank you enough for coming on the pod. You're a busy guy, and I really appreciate all your insights.
Yeah, thank you, CJ. I really appreciate it. This was an awesome experience, super fun to do. I look forward to hopefully doing it again in the future.
Run the Numbers is a mostly media production. Yelling and intro by Fat Joe. Artwork by Meg D'Alessandro. Show is executive produced by Ben Hillman. Nothing said on this podcast is intended to be business or investment advice. It's the sole opinion of me, a guy who feeds his dog way too much ice cream and has a history of net operating losses. LOL. If you like this podcast, hit subscribe and give us 5 stars. It will take like 2 seconds and our algorithm overlords love it. Drink water, call your mom, and have a great day. Peace.